Welcome to the World Language Fall Series implementation of the World Language Essential Standards broadcast. Today's focus is Essential Standard number 2, Interpretive Communication. Our agenda today includes the things you see on the screen. We're going to start with a welcome and an overview of North Carolina as what we call our high five and our bridging documents. Then we'll go into our section about the implementation of World Language Essential Standard number 2, the Interpretive Communication Standard. And we'll finish with some reminders and announcements for world language educators, as well as wrap up and any questions. When you're in WebEx, like we are right now, we're in a WebEx event. And so your control panel should look something like what you see on the left-hand side of the screen. You should have the slides front and center as the largest thing. And your control panel probably is on the right, although how it appears depends a little bit on which browser you use to log in and what type of device you're on, whether it's a laptop or smart device or that you're using the app. As you see on the screen, WebEx is accessible online as well as through the app. And all participants are on mute for recording. We are recording this broadcast, and we want to make sure we capture everything. Your control panel on the side displays the host or speaker, as well as any polling questions we do. We will have one polling question. And then our Q&A, our chat, is always available. On the screen, you see appearing a larger version of the control buttons you have. They may look a little different, but know that you always have access to the chat so that you can put in any questions you have or any concerns to be shared. I'm going to stop right now, and I'd like to look at the chat and ask you to please put in a yes or something to indicate that you can hear us broadcasting and that we're good to go today. All right, thank you. Those buttons should always be visible on your screen. And when you're ready to leave today, you just click the red button with the X on it to exit. But if you accidentally hit it and you need to come back in, you can always use the same join link that you got to get into the webinar before. Also, one last thing, do make sure in the chat box that your chat is set to send your questions or comments to whoever they need to go to. We're going to have some activities today where they'll need to go to everyone, and that should be part of your drop-down menu. Or if you want to send a question just to the host or panelist, you can also do that. But we prefer if people send it on the everyone button. Let's get started today by doing a polling question. It's always good to find out what everyone's motivations and goals are. So why did you decide to join the broadcast today? You can check all that apply. Maybe it was to access professional development made for world languages. Perhaps it's to earn a contact hour for license renewal, or gather information to share with your department, team, school, or district. You may want to learn about resources for the school year, or maybe ask a question about state standards or policy. I'll go ahead and run that polling question. It should appear in your control panel, and you can answer as you would like. All right, we've got about 20 seconds left to answer. Be sure you get your answer in. All right. And you should be able to see the results. It looks like there are a lot of reasons people are here today, so that's great. The most chosen one was earn one contact hour for license renewal. Anyone who participates in the live broadcast of our NCDPI World Language webinars does earn a certificate. That certificate will come via email as an attachment probably about 1 week from today. So look for that in your email box soon. Also, there are about the same number of people who are here to access professional development made for world languages, and that's always important for us to have. It's one of the main reasons why we do our world language webinar series throughout each school year, and make this information available in messages and reminders and announcements on our listservs. It's always good to have something made just for our world language educators. There are also a good number of you here today gathering information to share with your department, team, school, or district. Please know that these materials will be posted for your use locally about 1 week after the broadcast. That will include a recording of today's broadcast, as well as the slides as Google Slides, PowerPoint, and PDF, and any handouts or links that we use. I see some of you are here today because you want to learn about resources for this school year. We definitely have those with the bridging documents. Make sure you've taken a look at your chat bar to get those, and I will re-enter the links to those in case you came in after those were shared originally. These bridging documents were created just for our use this year, but are part of our standards toolkit to use. So those are now in the chat box again if you still need them. We'll be talking about them as we go through the broadcast. Finally, there's one person, at least, maybe more, who needs to ask a question about state standards or policy. You can always ask questions. We take questions in chat throughout the broadcast. If it's a question about the content or what's being presented, we may share it out so everyone benefits from the answer. Or if it's something more individual that needs to be addressed, we can do that too. So be sure and put your information into the chat box. All right. Let's go on then with our presentation today. One of the things we're sharing today has to do with some materials we created specifically for this school year. As we were preparing for this school year, amidst the pandemic and all the changes it's brought to us, we decided to create what we called NC's High Five. The 5 sort of most critical things we need to be thinking about as educators and as teachers when we went back to the classroom. And this High Five encompassed our proficiency-based state standards for world languages. Specifically, we looked at the 5 things you see on the screen, and we did a series of webinars in July to get everyone started. Then throughout the fall, we've been doing this series so that we can look more closely at each standard and how it fits within the High Five. Today, we're looking at number 2 on the High Five list, about processing language in the interpretive mode, because the interpretive mode is our essential standard number 2. The team behind the High Five that we have for North Carolina this year is currently on the screen. You've been hearing me talk. My name is Anne-Marie Gunter. I'm the World Languages Consultant at the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. I serve your needs and all of your questions. But working with me for the High Five team are the folks you see gathered here. Leslie Baldwin from Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools, Mark Hope from Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools, Melissa Perez from Durham Public Schools, and our speaker today, Delinda Ramirez-Carter from Wake County Public School System. These are all world language coordinators who are experienced world language teachers from the classroom and who are now in administrative roles. They have been very helpful in developing these materials and allowing us to disseminate them statewide so that everyone can benefit from them. I do believe as well that some of the High Five creators in the High Five team are on the line today, in addition to Delinda, who's going to be presenting about standard number 2. When we talk about our High Five and our reentry resources for this school year, there's some very specific things we looked at. First of all, we wanted to help teachers and administrators bridge the potential gaps from spring of 2020. There were quite a lot of transitions in the spring and quite unexpected changes. And so we wanted to make sure we had reentry resources that supported everyone as they looked at those gaps and moved forward. One of the most important things for us to do in world languages at any time, but certainly now, is the scaffold content so that students continue to build proficiency in the language they're learning. And instead of going back and relearning something that might have been missed because school was on remote instruction or something like that, we want to always think about moving forward and how we're looking at our proficiency goals and our state standards for each course that we're teaching and how we're getting students to those points. So these webinars and this whole series, in fact, is looking at sharing best practices in implementing standards-based curriculum, along with some strategies and performance tasks and activities and different tools you can use as teachers to make sure that's happening in a way that supports building students' proficiency. We also wanted to use these resources locally, in online, face-to-face, and blended classrooms, because right now especially, you never know what learning environment someone's going to be in. And many of us have been working online or in a blended fashion for some period of time. So we wanted to make sure that all of these resources were flexible and adjustable, and that we spoke to different ones about what might be best in a face-to-face situation versus an online situation, or what might work in both. And so these were the purposes of our reentry resources for this school year. We built, as part of this work, the bridging documents that you see here, and like I said, that I put in the chat box so you can link to them. These have become part of our instructional toolkit. They look specifically about moving students across the bridge, so from where they currently are with their target level language proficiency, whether that's in elementary, middle school, or in a high school course, to where they need to be by the end of the grade level or course in 2020, 2021. And we have them for all three of our K-12 programs. We have one for K-12 classical languages like Latin and Ancient Greek. We have one for K-12 dual language immersion or DLI programs, which also includes heritage language courses that bridge into higher level courses for native speakers of a language. And we have one for our K-12 modern language programs. As I said, I put those in the chat box, but you can link to those. They are posted as part of our standards instructional toolkit now, and available on the website. So take a look at those and keep one of those open so you can look at it as we go through these next slides and talk about what's on there. You all know that in our North Carolina World Language Essential Standards, or WLES, that we look at proficiency-based outcomes using the ACTFL scale. You see here the ACTFL inverted pyramid that looks at proficiency and how language becomes more complex over time. And you see our levels as defined by tasks of what students can do at each level. On your bridging documents, you'll notice we have some icons. For courses that have proficiency outcomes at the novice levels and what students can do, you'll see descriptors as well as the parrot icon, because at the novice level, our students are parrots. They can repeat back to us the things that they've learned, that we've taught them, and that's how they start putting language together to communicate. At intermediate level courses, they're survivors. This is where they've got enough language to create sentences and things on their own, to ask and answer simple questions, and to handle a situation that isn't too complicated. And then, of course, we also have higher level courses that have outcomes at the advanced level of proficiency. And this is what we call the storyteller. This is someone who can narrate and describe in all major time frames, handle different situations, even unexpected situations, and use their language quite well. Finally, you may also notice that there's a little parakeet coming out of an egg as the level of proficiency just before you get into proficiency-based course. So a lot of our elementary and middle school courses that are not for high school credit, but are just an introduction to a language, or maybe even exposure to world languages in general, help to build the foundations for proficiency. But you really can't build proficiency until you're in a course that specifically has enough time to have students develop that proficiency in the language. So that's what's on your bridging documents for the icon. Also, you'll notice on your bridging documents that you have the 3 modes of communication. This is a screenshot from some of the other tools we've used in the past to focus on those modes of communication. And it looks like this slide needs updating, but in general, we're going to be focusing on the interpretive communication mode, and that's viewing, listening, and reading. We're going to talk about how students interpret and respond to messages they receive, whether those are spoken or signed, as well as read or viewed. We know with interpretive communication, there's no active negotiation of meaning with the writer or the speaker. So the student has to take what's given to them and then figure out what is meant by that, whether they're listening to it, viewing it, or reading it. You'll notice on the left-hand side, we have some of those icons that we've used on the bridging documents. Looks like the interpretive one is missing, but you see it on the bridging document, and you'll see it on our slides today as part of our materials. In addition, the can-do statements that you see are summaries from the necessitable, actful, can-do statements. Some of you may have seen these documents before and even worked with them. This is just a screenshot of one of them. These materials include the communication mode. This one happens to be a picture of interpersonal communication, which is our first standard, but we're going to be focusing on interpretive communication today. They also have proficiency benchmarks for the overall proficiency level. And then they have language functions where we get into what happens with that skill area and how that looks over time. And then you see the proficiency levels broken down into their sub-levels of low, mid, and high for novice, intermediate, and advanced. And there's a can-do descriptor for each one, similar to the can-do descriptors that are on the bridging documents, which, like I said, are really summaries of each particular skill area or standard and the proficiency outcome expected for that particular course or program. In addition, the necessitable, actful, can-do statements actually have performance indicators, which are more detailed types of can-do statements that you can start to use in your classroom, as well as some other things that we're going to talk about today. So getting back to our high five, when we talked about the 5 most important things we wanted to make sure we included so that we would encompass all the standards and our proficiency-based target language outcomes, we looked at the TEL project. TEL stands for Teacher Effectiveness for Language Learning. It's what's used in the administrator guides, which are another instructional toolkit component with our standards, but it really helps us focus as teachers on what we need to do. This is our last broadcast in this series, so we have had previous broadcasts that looked at different components of the high five, and today's focus is LE3. The teacher provides opportunities for students to process language in the interpretive mode. You can see the other 4 high five goals that we chose for this school year. But all of the ones we're talking about in the fall webinar series, the learning experience and learning tools components, directly address our state standards, and we get all of our state standards covered with that work. This is just a screenshot to remind everyone about how our state standards are structured. We have 4 state standards: interpersonal communication, interpretive communication, presentational communication, and culture. And those are woven through the 3 strands we have about connections to language and literacy, connections to other disciplines, and communities. Obviously, these all have proficiency outcomes as well. And that's how our standards work together to support proficiency building in any language. Today, we are going to focus on interpretive communication. Like I said, the TEL project LE3. And you're going to see the interpretive communication icon that there on the right-hand side of the screen that focuses on understanding, interpreting, or analyzing authentic text through listening, reading, or viewing. That's what's going to be our main focus today and our content presentation. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our speaker today. You see that is Delinda Ramirez-Carter. Give us just a moment as we switch presenters behind the scenes. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then make Delinda the presenter, and she's going to share with you the information that she has for you on interpretive communication.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody can hear me okay. And I am so excited to be here with you all today. As Anne-Marie stated, I am the World Languages Senior Administrator for K-12 in Wake County Schools. And I'm going to be talking about the interpretive mode. And I'm just trying to get my little screen to share properly. And I think I've got it. Okay, there I am. Lost myself for a second. Okay, here we go. So as Anne-Marie cited earlier, the TEL project identifies goals for our teachers in the interpretive mode, and it will focus on activities that allow students to interpret, analyze, and interact with authentic materials, and strategies to make language comprehensible. And as we are discussing the interpretive mode, it is important to also note letter A. If our students are to engage in activities in the target language, classes need to be in the target language. So we won't forget letter A through our presentation today. The Necessful Actual Can-Do statements specify that in the interpretive mode that language learners understand, interpret, or analyze inauthentic text through listening, reading, and viewing. And as Anne-Marie talked about, the icon in the top upper right-hand corner, that is from the Necessful Actual Can-Do statements. And so we'll unpack that just a little bit more. The can-do statements further specify that students will be able to understand, interpret, or analyze inauthentic informational text, more specifically, and fictional text that the students hear, read, or view, and that the students can understand, interpret, or analyze in conversations and discussions that they hear, read, or view in which they are not a participant, because that would make it interpersonal communication. Element E of the TEL project goals indicates that teachers will need to provide opportunities for students to interact with and process the language. Let's first look at some activities that can be done in any learning environment. These are general activities that can be used with any type of text. Some might need to be modified depending on your teaching model. Whiteboards work for students to draw pictures of what they understood. They can also share answers with single words or in sentences. Chart paper is great for creating large graphic organizers that can contribute, that the students can contribute to. The great thing about chart paper is that you can save it and share it with another class or refer to it with the same class on the next day. You can also create extra large graphic organizers with a fat permanent marker and a white shower curtain liner or a plastic tablecloth. I use extra large graphic organizers on the floor with my students. And so if you use a plastic tablecloth, they are light enough to hang on your magnetic dry erase board. For either, I use pictures to sort, and sometimes I use words or sentence frames or fragments. But for both the pictures and the text, I mounted them to construction paper and of course laminated them. This way they could be used over and over again and in other classes or with other activities such as the sequencing or matching text to picture activity. So think about how you can make these ideas virtual. The Google Suite has several shareable documents that you could use. And don't forget about the discussion forums embedded in your learning management systems. They can also be used to capture students' responses or group responses from breakout rooms or from face-to-face group work. Here are some additional ideas. These ideas can be modified for students to experience in multiple learning environments. So the first is finish the picture. I like this idea because the students can be listening to you give the description, or you can have a student to be the one to describe the image they need to complete. I also like the closed listening activities. Students need to receive the language from sources other than yourself. So it's good to hear from other adults, other native speakers, and other students. And providing access to other sources of input aids in the proficiency development, so they can't just hear you the whole time. There's 4 corners, and this one is a great activity to get the class up and moving. Now for elementary, it is a way to get the wiggles out, and in secondary, it's a way to wake them up, all while engaging in the target language. And in the virtual classroom, this activity helps with student inclusion, student voice, and overall relationship building with your students. And the last one, the choice boards, also consider station rotations and centers. They're a great way to give students choice, provide differentiation, and allow for further collaboration with an audio or a visual text. Some of these ideas require the student access a text and characters from that text. The first activity, the postcard, is a fun way to keep the story going. You might need to explain, however, what a postcard is to some of your students. Don't know how many are still using snail mail. The next couple, the Pick 5 activity and the fictional friends activities, also require for your students to access the text in various ways. The fourth one on this slide, the Making Inferences activity, is from the Creative Language class blog. Making inferences is a literacy skill that students often need to strengthen, and it carries over to other content areas as a higher order thinking skill. You can click on the link to take you directly to Inferences activity on the Creative Language class blog, and these slides will be available later on the NCDPI site. And like Four Corners, the scavenger hunt activity can serve to get kids up and moving, interacting with each other, and building relationships within your class. One of the my favorite scavenger hunt activities was find someone who. That was always very interesting. Okay, let's pause for a brief commercial break. I know that you all also have some awesome ideas. We're going to use Jamboard to make a jam of our favorite interpretive activity ideas. For those of you new to Jamboard, it is a Google Suite tool. So it has similar functionality to the other Google tools, and no need for you or your students to create an account to use it. In a few seconds, we will share a link to our first jam. Once you click the link, you will see a slide, a blue world map on it. On the left of your screen, you will see the toolbar. Then you will click the sticky note icon to start your sticky. Your sticky note window will appear and look just like this. And you'll actually type right there in the yellow section. You can even change the color of your sticky note if you want to. And then after you are happy with your sticky and what you have included on the sticky, you will save your sticky. And then you can also drag it around on the page to an empty spot. And then you can also resize it by pulling on the corners, much like you would resize an image. Okay, so here are the directions. This is what we're going to do. Our first jam is my favorite interpretive activity. I just took a couple of minutes to talk about some interpretive activities, but like I said, you may have more. You may have a favorite one that has just been working so well in your virtual environment or your concurrent teaching environment or whatever environment you're in. It doesn't matter which one you choose. It could be a face-to-face environment activity. That is fine too. I will put 1 minute on the timer, and you're going to take 1 minute to think of your favorite interpretive activity. You want to give it a title, if it doesn't already have one. You can want to specify if it can be done remote, face-to-face, or both. And you want to try and get your description to 3 sentences or less on the sticky. And if you want to include your name on the sticky, you're welcome to, but that is not necessary. These stickies are anonymous, which is another great feature of Jamboard for when students are wanting to participate. They can continue to be anonymous. Next directions, you will take another minute to click on the sticky note and start typing. So I'm going to give you a minute of thinking time. Come up with your best activity. Then you'll start your sticky and go ahead and type on it and then save it as you wish. Then we'll take a few minutes to check out the other ideas on the jam. Maybe you can get some new ideas or just be reminded of some ideas you haven't done in a while. This activity will completely last 6 minutes from start to finish, and we'll come back together after 6 minutes have passed. So I'm going to exit out of my little presentation here. Let's see, how do I do that? There we are. And I'm going to go into the Jamboard. So at this point, Anne-Marie has put the link to the Jamboard in the chat. And it's just a straight link, much like a Google document would be. And what we have on the screen right now is the picture of our Jamboard. And I'm going to start my timer now for 1 minute. And this is 1 minute of think time. So I'll start the timer and then I'll be quiet for a minute. Give you some think time to come up with your most favorite interpretive go-to activity. The 1 minute timer is done. So that was our think time timer. And so if we had a chance to think about what activity you want to share, that also gave our friends a chance to click on the link and join and get to the Jamboard. And so at time, I started another timer. Now's the time for you to go ahead and click on the sticky note icon over here on the left-hand side on the toolbar. You can see that toolbar here on the left. Click on your sticky note and go ahead and start yourself a sticky. And as you type on your sticky, you're going to find that as more people join the jam, you're going to need to drag your sticky to different parts of the screen. And so that whole world map is available to add your sticky. So I'm going to be quiet for a couple of seconds here and give you an opportunity to add your ideas. If you finish your idea and want to add another one, please feel free to continue adding ideas. Okay, we'll be wrapping up this activity in about 20 seconds. Alrighty. I hope that you have all had an opportunity to add a sticky to our Jamboard. And I hope that you have had an opportunity to read some of these and possibly be reminded of some activities that you haven't done in a while, or maybe some new ideas that you could implement. Thank you for everybody who contributed to this Jamboard. And I like that some of you were also experimenting with the pen or marker over off to the left in the toolbar. That cracked me up. That was awesome. So what you just experienced was an example of how to use and implement Jamboard with your students. One of the reasons I like Jamboard, and like I said earlier, is that it doesn't require an account for them to contribute to this, and they can remain anonymous. Sometimes you just want some feedback to kind of gauge where your students are with something. And as a class, you might not want to necessarily or need their names. And so anonymity sometimes is a great factor that will encourage a student to participate, the fact that their name is not included. However, if you did need their name to record their answers, you could, in the instructions, tell them to first put their name on their sticky and then continue with the instructions. So it'll be really important to have very clear instructions so that they're comfortable with the tool, especially the first time that they use a tool. You want to take it slow. Perhaps do an activity that doesn't, it's kind of like a low stakes activity where they just are kind of like participating and having a chance to try it. And then of course, set any parameters that you need to for the activity. In other words, are they limited to sharing one sticky or can they share 4? How much time will they have? I think that's also another really important factor is letting your participants know in advance how much time they're going to have. And I'll talk about think time a little bit later in another activity. So again, I do appreciate you all sharing. And this jam will be available on the DPI presentation website after this presentation. All right, so I'm going to click off of this jam for a little bit, but it's still going to be live, so not to worry. We'll visit this again a little bit later. All right, here I am. Let me fix my screen. And there we go. So let's move on to element C of the TEL project goals. Make sure I'm not muted. Okay. The teacher uses a variety of verbal and nonverbal strategies to make language comprehensible. And so here's a quick list of some of those strategies. So we're focusing on making language comprehensible this time. And so the first one that we have there are the word walls. Now, word walls can have frequently used vocabulary and new words from the unit. Earlier this year, I know there was a lot of activity around digital word walls. And so whether they're digital or plastered to your classroom wall, those are very beneficial when students are trying to negotiate meaning with various audio or visual texts. Language ladders are words or phrases that are linked together because of common function or meaning. I think a lot of times we don't make good use of our language ladders, but these can also be helpful in making use of meaning, helpful also in of course, the reading and speaking skills, but also when students are trying to, again, negotiate meaning. And so what we mean by language ladders, an example, you could have words or phrases to express degrees of liking or not liking something, such as I love, I like a lot, I like a little, I don't, or I don't like at all. So it has the different degrees. Or you can have a language ladder that details frequency, such as always, almost always, often, every once in a while, rarely, almost never, or never. Other ideas for language ladders include sequencing, transitions, expressions. Next, we have the anchor charts, and these are beneficial to remind students of any patterns and language functions that the class has been exploring together. We have our images and visual cues that can help when vocabulary is very new or when there might be a difficult reading passage coming up. With the actions can be like thinking about like TPR, associate an action with a word so that when you talk about it again, you say the action and it will remind them what the meaning was. And the jigsaw with other students. Students can work in pairs to check each other for understanding. That's always a good opportunity for students to really try and solidify their own learning by explaining something to another student. For the picture walk, so before engaging in a text, you would launch the activity with a series of pictures from the story, or pictures that represent activities or actions that happen within the story to kind of give your students an idea of what is to come in the reading. And if there are a series of characters, you could also begin with a character introduction, perhaps create bios for each character or keep a character map posted where students wouldn't have to really figure out who the characters were once the reading started. They could really just focus on the action that's happening within the story. So when you're talking about making language comprehensible, part of that is also developing the skills necessary to understand what it is that they are hearing or reading or seeing. So developing interpretive skills is a must to include in your lesson planning. Being intentional with each step will guide the students to success. So whether the skill is reading, listening, or viewing, it is important to have the students access the text multiple times. Each time, change what the focus is on. So in the case of a video clip, have the students watch for clues that will help them understand the plot, or have them look at differences or significance in the video clip. In reading, have them identify various components of the text. Of course, they won't identify all of these components at once, but you can identify a component with each read of the text, thus giving students multiple opportunities to engage with the text. On the right of the screen is an example of accessing the text multiple times. So in this example, that first read, students would underline words that they know. Your example could be they underline cognates, or your example could be they're underlining adjectives. Depends on whatever you want to highlight as a theme or words or connections to make as they're starting to read. And so with each pass through the reading, they're focusing on something different. Developing students with listening skills is also a must. How many times have you heard students say, I didn't understand any of that when you played, for example, a weather report or a bit of a podcast, and you're thinking to yourself, you know that the last 2 weeks have been spent on most of the content that was in that passage. So much of that statement comes from listening fatigue or lack of stamina on the student's part. So if a student does not have the stamina for a longer listening passage, they often stop listening and give up. So over time, what the students are listening to must increase in length, and students need to be comfortable not getting every word. Teach them to identify keywords along the way. On the slide, we have some points to consider when engaging in listening activities. Be aware of the level and length of the text. If it is a more challenging text, be sure that the task is scaffolded to meet the student's level +1. You'll also want to assign a task for any listening text. Otherwise, the students won't see the point. They'll often miss it. A task helps to clarify that what the student should be getting out of a listening text. And when you are working on building stamina, the length of the original text does not necessarily need to increase, but the amount of sustained listening over time should increase. So, when you first introduce the text, you might hit the pause button, talk about it, have some questions about what they just heard, in increments. Over time, you'll want to lengthen the time between the pause buttons. And you'll also want to encourage your students to derive meaning on their own and then allow them to discuss with another student to verify, ask questions, answer questions, and compare notes. Student collaboration will help to strengthen the class relationships as well. When they start to depend on each other, they start to build these bonds that will help then with the classroom climate. On the right is an image from one of my favorite blogs, the Creative Language class. This listening task is for a novice learner and allows you to engage your students with a listening task that is above their linguistic ability. So by providing scaffolds such as this one, students can build stamina to listening to more complex text, but with the support they need to make meaning from it. Notice the images that are scattered throughout, so they might not know every single word, but seeing the image plus the word, they have an idea of what those components are including, and they have an idea of what might be in the audio that they are listening to. And I do apologize for the Spanish example. I did teach Spanish, so I was comfortable knowing that this was a suitable example. I looked at some French examples, but I was afraid I might choose something that was not appropriate, so just stuck to Spanish. So it is also very important to check for understanding, because unless you check for understanding, you may not know what the students have learned, obviously. And checking for understanding helps to identify misconceptions that can interfere with learning. And checking for understanding provides students with a model of good learning skills. Every check for understanding is a formative assessment that can also be a performance assessment. That's really important. So as we are getting ready to close out first semester for many of us, many teachers have struggled with the idea of assessing students remotely and the propensity and opportunity for students to use tools to help their understanding, also known as Google Translate. But it's also important to note that you already have a snapshot of your students' listening skill levels. Each time you engage in an activity is an opportunity to check for understanding. So be sure to record your observations, formal and informal, along the way. So when you do have to give an assessment and you're worried that they might get some assistance from Google Translate, for example, you really should have a great idea or a great understanding of where your students are as far as their interpretive communication. So what I suggest is that you create for yourself an easy-to-use guide or rubric for your notes. So I taught elementary Spanish for 15 years. I only saw my students once a week for about 40 minutes. So with transitions in and out of my classroom, the instruction lasted about 30 minutes. So 30 minutes once a week, that was about 18 times a semester. You can do the math, not a lot of time. And that was 18 times a semester if there was not an assembly, teacher workday, fire drill, or inclement weather during their class time. Remember those days? Yeah, so once I switched to teaching at the secondary level, I continued to use the same basic guide that I use with my elementary school students. 3 was the highest, or they completed the task successfully. I'd give them a 2 if they completed the task, but with assistance. And I gave them a 1 if they did not complete the task. So this provided me with informal data that I used to inform my teaching. It also provided me a grade for my students that I met with very few times. And many of you might be probably feeling that way with this remote, blended, or even concurrent teaching model. So the key is to provide multiple opportunities for your students to interact with the text, and then also give them that opportunity to demonstrate that they understood or could derive meaning. So just in passing, this was not a participation grade, by the way, though I did mark each time they did participate with a 3, 2, or a 1. And so this helped me to track at what level of accuracy they contributed to the activity. And it also helped me to be aware of the opportunities or lack thereof that I gave my students to demonstrate understanding at different points in the unit. Keeping track of this will really give you an idea of how often you're giving students the opportunity to show that they understood. So because you can't call on every student
Okay, we'll pause just a minute. Looks like we're having some technical difficulties.
Sorry, that was me. I was a technical difficulty. Like I was saying, so the popsicles did help me to keep track of who I call them to participate. And again, it's pretty basic, but you know, with all the new tech tools we have, sometimes getting back to basics and remembering what the basics for language acquisition might be, sometimes it's good to go back in that direction. And so I highly recommend some popsicle sticks. They don't need to be pretty colors like this, but again, keep track of how often you're really giving your students an opportunity to participate, to show that they actually understand. So here are some strategies that you could actually use a 3-2-1 rubric with. And as you can see, some of these checks for understanding were included in the activity slide a couple of slides ago. So looking at acting out the gestures is a quick way to get the entire class for check for understanding. Dig back into those TPR days and don't be afraid to assign a gesture to words that lend themselves to one. You'll often see your kids continuing to do that gesture long after you have left that unit. You can really tell that it works. We talked about whiteboards earlier, but just looking at the whiteboard possibility, that's a possibility for a whole class check for understanding. You can quickly see with one glance the student responses. And since most of your students you can assume would be earning a 3 in that 3-2-1 rubric I was talking about, I actually only noticed students who scored a 2 or a 1 consistently through the activity. This way I wasn't sitting with a clipboard, documenting. I could actually look, and those 1 or 2, maybe 3 students that are just not getting it, I could document them with a 2 or a 1, depending on how they fared towards the end of the activity. For the finger holdups, I prefer the pre-printed response cards, but a 5-to-5 holdup can also be a quick gauge to show if your students are understanding. And the sequencing pictures is a great way for students to interact with an oral or written text. Simply provide printed text chunks to match the pictures after they have put them in order without the words. On the right-hand side, some verbal strategies. The lineup strategy is basically pairing students, honestly. You can find other creative ways to pair your students. In this virtual environment, the breakout rooms are good for random pairings. And as was discussed earlier, it's good practice for students to help each other to understand. And because there's a component in learning for a student when a student has to explain a concept to another student. And the fact that the student can and does explain the concept will help to solidify it for that student. So having these students interact with each other as much as possible is really, really key. But understandably, it's been a little bit difficult in these times, and breakout rooms are a really good tool to use for that. Summarizing kind of works the same way. It requires the student processes and verbalize what they understood. And adding the summarizing step after they have processed also helps to solidify what was understood. The questioning is a quick and easy activity. This activity can make use of holdups for the yes, no, and true, false answer, but it can also be done verbally with, of course, more sustained answers. And the exit and slips, these can be done in person and online. This activity is a great way to inform your teaching and gather some informal data on each student. Much like the 3-2-1 observational data, exit entrance slips can also serve in that same capacity. Remember, every activity is an opportunity to check for understanding. So continuing with our checks for understanding, here are some additional checks for understanding. And as many of our schools are turning to current teaching, where you have teachers teaching face-to-face as well as virtual at the same time, you are seeing many of these techniques working in any setting, which is great. Many of these ideas that were just discussed, but check out some of the digital tools that are listed. These work well in our virtual and in-person teaching environments. Many of you have used some of these pre-pandemic, like Socrative, Kahoot, GimKit. It'll be important to remember that as we go back to normal, perhaps next school year, that it'll be a new normal. And so we won't really go back to where we left off. We'll go back to a new normal, and our digital presence with our students will look different moving forward. So what is your favorite go-to to check for understanding activity? We're going to do a quick activity called Flood the Chat. I will give you 1 minute to think of your idea. Then you will start typing it in the chat box on this WebEx call. But do not hit enter or click the send icon yet. After 1 minute, I'll say go, and we will flood the chat at the same time. So I'll be putting 1 minute on my timer. This will be your think time again. Let's see here, getting 1 minute on my timer. This is your think time and prepare time. So what you're going to do in this 1 minute is you're going to make sure that your chat is set to everyone so that we can see your ideas. You're going to think about it. You're going to start typing it in, but don't hit enter yet. After 1 minute, I'll say go and we will flood the chat. So I'm starting my 1 minute timer now. This is your think time. You can start typing in the chat, find the box to type in. Think about your favorite check for understanding activity. All right. Go ahead and hit enter, and hopefully we'll see the chat get flooded. Awesome. Hopefully the chat continues to get flooded. And so as you're looking through the ideas in the chat, this is another activity that you could use with your students to check for understanding, get quick whole class feedback, or input. It is important to give some think time before a sharing activity. I know when I am rushed to share and I can't think of something quick enough, I don't usually participate because the moment is gone. Always remember your students who need more think time. And I do appreciate you participating in that. Love the chat. That was awesome. Moving forward, we have some interpretive digital tools. So whether you're teaching in a virtual environment or face-to-face or both, these tools have easy-to-use platforms for interpretive activities. Again, you may have used some of these in previous years, or perhaps they are new to you and encourage you to check some of these out. And Pear Deck and Nearpod have risen as some of the favorites for interactive opportunities in both environments. And Anne-Marie has a great collection of additional tools listed by both on her Teaching Remotely webpage. Here are some sites to find interpretive resource. Also consider accessing podcasts, video clips, news reports, any of these resources on this slide. The goal is to use a resource that provides input +1 in the target language. And don't forget to use authentic resources that encourage students to investigate and interact with culture. These sites have multiple languages, and don't forget about the language-specific resources that Anne-Marie also has on her site. Moving right along, we had one more jam.
Actually, we need to break in. We are at 5 o'clock. I know we've been getting a lot of information about the interpretive tools, but to respect everybody's time, we may have to skip over this second Jamboard activity, unfortunately. However, this may be a good time to talk a little bit about Jamboard, Delinda, because we had some questions early on during the first Jamboard about where it's located and that kind of thing. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you got started with Jamboard?
Sure. I'm actually going to exit out of my little slide here, and I'm going to a Google. And when you click on the Google Apps, you scroll down a little bit into your Google Apps, and you'll find the little Jamboard sign here. So it's within the Google Apps. You just click on the Jamboard, and it will give you this screen where you have opportunity to see some of your previous Jamboards. You press the orange plus button at on the bottom right-hand corner to create a new jam. And that's it. Use the toolbar over here. You have your marking pen, you have an eraser, you have your sticky note icon, you have insert an image, insert shapes, insert text box, and this laser pointer where you can use, like if you were doing work in classroom, you wanted to highlight something, you can use the laser pointer as a highlight, but it doesn't actually leave any markings. And that's how you get started. You set a title for it, you set a background to it. You can have a picture as a background, just like I did for it with the world map. And it's that easy. If you want to add another Jamboard, another slide to it, you just go to your next slide. And so on my previous Jamboard, we were going to continue onto the next one, which was set up for our Jamboard number 2. And I used the highlighter marker to draw a line here, but that would have been our next activity.
And I do see some questions about Jamboard. As Delinda said, it's part of the Google suite of tools. So if you use Google, you have Jamboard. We've got a couple people asking about things like, how did you put Jamboard in your Google presentation? Well, Jamboard, like all other Google tools and Google documents, creates a URL, a web address. And so we simply linked that web address, and that was what we used to get to the Jamboard for today's presentation. I also saw some of you said you liked Jamboard better than some of the other tools you've been using lately. So this will be something that you can experiment with and think about how you can use with students and other learners that you're working with. Maybe even use it professionally in like your professional learning communities or professional learning teams.
Shall I go on my last slide?
Yes, go ahead and finish up about our interpretive communication.
Okay. All right, take us right up to that 5 o'clock time there. So just in summary, and to close our discussion on the interpretive mode of communication, let's go back real quick to the accessible Apple Canvas statements. At the bottom of each level document, they leave us with some final elements of literacy that can lead to high levels of understanding in the interpretive mode. Factors that impact how well learners understand text include text complexity or length, familiarity with a topic and background knowledge, and the ability to use literacy strategies such as recognizing keywords, detecting the main idea, identifying supporting details, noting organizational features, guessing meaning from context, and identifying the author's perspective and cultural perspective norms. I do thank you for allowing me this time with you all today. I hope you have a fantastic break and best wishes for a sparkling new year. And I will turn this back over to Anne-Marie. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dylan. And thank you for sharing all that wonderful information and the go-to ideas for interpretive communication. You know, there's something really for everyone to start using, or maybe think about how to use it in a new way, because there's a lot of opportunity there to think about how our students connect with the learning that they're doing, with the authentic text that they're using, and how that looks in building their proficiency. So much appreciated for your presentation. And we'll continue on with just a few more things about what we need to cover today. I'm going to go ahead and switch back over from a presentation standpoint. Linda, could you make me the presenter again?
I've lost my little my bar, just switching back over. I'm sorry, can't find it.
No worries. I can do it from behind the scenes here.
All right. Sorry about that.
Good. No worries. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can finish out today. With some reminders and announcements for all of us as world language educators. Just a quick reminder, we've looked at several different places, including the space for the digital tools by communication mode and those language-specific resources. Those links are in the chat, but you can get to all of them on our World Languages Google site on the Teaching World Languages Remotely resource bank. And you see that has its own bit.ly link, and it takes you, and you have 4 different buttons so you can link over to those other resources that you saw Delinda talking about today. We also maintain a list of professional development, or PD, for K-20 instructors, and it's under our professional development tab on the website. You see here on the left just a screenshot of what's coming up in January. We're now very close to the new year, and there's a lot of things happening with PD. And information is added regularly to this list. Currently, we have links to all kinds of things, conferences, institutes, meetings, and almost everything, of course, is online. We have details for certainly a lot of spring 21 activities and even some of the summer conferences that are coming up. You can go to the PD list page and look at that information as it's added, or you can sign up for the World Language Instructors listserv using that bit.ly link of bit.ly/ncdpi updates. By virtue of attending today or registering for this broadcast, I will make sure your email address has been added to the listserv too, so you get those reminders and announcements and occasionally newsletters about a professional development that's available. Don't forget, this webinar series continues on. This is our fall series, and it is complete. The archives from all of our broadcasts from the fall series, including the one from today, either is already posted or will be posted soon on our webinar information page. And so you can see the broadcasts from September, October about culture and interpersonal and presentational communication, as well as this one. I do post everything usually within 1 week of our broadcast. So the slides, the recording, the links, the handouts, all of that will be on our webinar series page. Coming up, we have our winter series that starts in January, as well as our spring series that goes through May. You have the links there on the slide, but again, those links to register for any of the webinars that you want to participate in are on that webinar information page. So they're all posted for you, but you can see what our topics are and our times are. Some of our webinars are an hour long and some just a little bit longer. Also, as upcoming conferences, just to keep everyone informed, of course, we have the virtual spring conference for FLANC, the Foreign Language Association of North Carolina. That'll be on Saturday, February 27th. It is virtual, and there will also be virtual dual language immersion or DLI school site visits on the Friday or the day before the conference. Look for that. It will feature the best of FLANC presenters from the fall in that spring conference. Also coming up is the SCOL conference, the Southern Conference on Language Teaching. This is the regional version of FLANC, so our regional professional organization, and they will also do their virtual conference in the spring. It'll be March 18th to the 21st, and there'll be synchronous and asynchronous sessions. You can go to their websites for more information, and the websites are included on the slide as well as in the notes. And so I'll post those in the chat pretty soon here. Finally, we're to wrap up in questions. Just a reminder, I do post all of the archives and what they'll include. And if you're waiting for your certificate of participation, keep in mind that that will be sent out via email. We have on this screen that it should arrive within 2 weeks from today. We're getting them out a little more quickly than that, so it may not be that. And we usually get them out actually within a week or so. Do remember that your local education agencies, your districts and charter schools do have to approve professional development. That's it for today. I always want to reference us back to our NCDPI World Languages website at bit.ly/NCDPIWL. You feel free to contact me if you ever have any questions. You see my email and phone number there. My phone actually travels with me on my computer, so you're welcome to use that or email me with questions or concerns. I'm going to pause for a moment, take a look in the chat box, and see what else we have to answer as questions. Someone had asked a little earlier about will we have the chat information and so forth. Yes, definitely. I will grab the chat so that we can post that as part of the archives. We will also have a copy of the Jamboard with all the responses you did in the activity, so you can look at that. And that will be posted up with our archives. All right, I'm seeing a lot of thank yous. We do appreciate you joining us today. We know it's a busy time for everyone, but as Linda said earlier, we hope that everyone has a happy holiday season, that we get a little break from all that's been happening with work and take some time to celebrate and then go refreshed into the new year.